Hey guys, tonight we slip straight into a Viking nightmare you probably won't survive, unless you're part polar bear. You stand on the threshold of their winter, a cold so deep it steals your breath, a darkness so long you start to wonder if the sun will ever return. The fields are silent under a skin of frost, the days shrinking to barely a sigh of pale gray light, and the night stretching on like a monster's open maw. You might think you can handle a chilly winter's day, but trust me, you are not ready for this, where the night goes on for weeks and death prowls just beyond the walls. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know down below where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a rough path through stubble fields left ragged by the harvest. Summer's green is only a distant rumor now, replaced by pale, thin light that spills across the land for what feels like a heartbeat before night comes crashing back. The first snow clings in dirty patches to the fields, and the wind carries a sting that drills straight through your cloak and into your bones. Out here, in Viking country, winter is not a gentle, picturesque season with cozy fireplaces and mugs of cocoa. It is a siege, a blunt weapon swung by nature itself, and you are a target. People scramble to bring in the last bits of firewood, stuffing peat and half-dry branches into storage sheds, trying to outlast the dark months ahead. Historians still argue whether the Vikings planned all their raids to avoid winter, or if they simply knew better than to pick a fight with both men and the gods of cold at once. One thing is certain. Once the sun began to fade, you stayed put if you had any sense. You pass a pair of villagers hacking apart a half-frozen sheep, preserving what little fresh meat they can before everything turns rock hard. The air is so sharp it scours your lungs, leaving you coughing and squinting. And the sun? It seems to collapse behind the horizon almost as soon as it rises, like a weak candle guttering out. There is no color in the land anymore, only muted browns, washed-out grays, and the dim blue glow of twilight. You wonder how anyone keeps their mind from unraveling in a place where darkness lasts this long. The Norse called this time of year the Fimbulvetur, a mighty winter that in myth might last 3 entire seasons. That word alone sounds like a curse. There were no cheerful solstice parties with carols. Instead, people huddled around a sputtering fire, muttering prayers to Odin or Freyr, hoping the gods hadn't turned their backs. You can almost hear the desperation behind every ritual, every half-remembered blessing carved into a stick of wood for luck. The Vikings believed this season could break you if you didn't respect it. And they were probably right. One old saga tells of a king who tried to push his men to keep fighting through winter. Their ships froze in a fjord, and they ended up smashing ice off the rigging with hammers, so heavy and thick that even iron tools splintered. In the end, half of them froze to death before a single sword was drawn. The lesson? You fight when the sun is high, but in winter you fight only the cold. Sometimes it wasn't just the weather you had to fear. There were night-creeping thieves who knew no one would pursue them across deep snow. There were wolves growing bolder, drawn close to the scent of drying meat. And worst of all, the night itself, a kind of slow suffocation that pressed against your chest, made you see things that maybe weren't even there. In this bleak darkness, your mind played tricks. Shapes shifted, shadows moved. Maybe that's why the Vikings invented so many monsters, to give a name to the things that crawled through their imaginations when the night refused to end. You push forward, feeling your boots catch on ice-slick stones. You hear the wail of a wind so cold it almost sounds alive, moaning through the gaps in longhouse walls, poking its icy fingers inside to steal warmth wherever it can. People seal up the doors and windows, piling up furs and straw, trying to hold back the chill. But deep down, they know it will find a way in. It always does. A quirky tidbit. Some Vikings would place a carved wooden face near their hearth to scare off the winter spirits. Apparently, even the spirits of cold had a sense of humor and could be frightened away by a silly-looking idol. It might sound ridiculous, but when the darkness tries to swallow your world, you'll do anything, absolutely anything, to protect your tiny spark of heat and hope. As you stand in the gathering night, the first stars pinprick the sky, and you realize they will be your only light for weeks to come. There is no electric lamp to break the gloom, no street lantern to mark your path. Just a frozen, endless hush that spreads across the land like a shroud. It's beautiful in a brutal way, but you can already feel it pressing at the edge of your sanity. You wonder how many minds cracked in these long winters, with nothing but memories and fear to keep them company. The darkness keeps spreading, an ancient tide, and you, lone traveler, will have to face it right alongside them. You step forward into the night, where a pale moon cuts through thin clouds, casting a weak silver glow over the Viking settlement. The world seems to hold its breath, every shadow hard and long, every distant sound sharpened by the bitter air. You draw your cloak tighter, but it does little good. Here, in Viking winter, the cold is a living thing. It creeps along your bones, sneaks beneath wool, and shows no mercy to muscle or marrow. This cold is not some polite shiver in the doorway. It is an axe, hacking at you until you break. You duck into a longhouse, eyes adjusting to the dim glow of a low-burning hearth. The people inside huddle like animals, pressed close together for survival. Their breath clouds the air, mingling with the wood smoke and choking drifts. You see children wrapped head to toe in layers of ragged fur, their red cheeks raw and blistered. The men's faces are gaunt, lined with worry. Firewood piles are shrinking by the day, and you can sense a grim, silent dread beneath every cautious conversation. Historians still argue whether Viking building design was genius or fatal. Those thick timber walls could keep out wolves, but they also trap smoke, turning the longhouse into a slow-burning chimney. You shift near the hearth, hoping to thaw your fingers, but the fire burns low because fuel is too precious to waste. One careless night of roaring flames could mean weeks of frozen misery later. You can practically taste the desperation in the air. Even in wealthier households, the same logic applies: conserve or die. The chill seeps through every plank and roof beam, biting at ankles, chilling your lungs. It is a ruthless teacher. A woman crosses the floor, carrying a clay pot of half-frozen stew, her hands shaking as she tries not to spill a single drop. The smell is thin and sour, but to those here, it is a small feast. They ration every crumb as if it were gold, waiting for the faint warmth of spring. You notice one old man with a frostbitten toe wrapped in scraps of linen. He doesn't complain. There's no point. Everyone expects to lose a little something to the cold. A finger, a bit of an ear. It's almost casual, like winter taxes you for the privilege of breathing its air. Out in the smaller farms, it gets even worse. There, you'd find no neighbors close by, no helpful hand to share coals or spare a basket of dried fish. They live alone against the snow, hammering down the shutters, counting every scrap of peat. Vikings prized independence, sure, but you can see how cruel that idea feels when the storms come rolling down from the mountains. Sometimes being alone meant you froze alone. You glance through a small window, only to see the moonlight reflecting off a field turned into a white wasteland. Nothing grows, nothing moves, nothing gives. The Vikings believed winter was a test from the gods, that the All-Father might watch to see if you'd prove worthy of spring. A quirky tidbit here. Some Viking parents would tell children that those who whined about the cold would be forgotten by the sun, a terrifying bit of parenting if there ever was one. As you stand there, your toes begin to numb again, even in the weak firelight. You shift foot to foot, breathing in the sour scent of damp wool and stale sweat, and feel a sense of awe that these people survived at all. Some historians think that Viking toughness was built more by these winters than by war. Steel might be forged in battle, but courage was forged here, in a place that tried to kill you every single night. There's something harshly poetic about it, how they leaned into this punishment, refused to yield, and turned suffering into a badge of pride. You hear an old voice reciting verses near the fire, half-forgotten lines about survival and honor, about how even the frost cannot break a true heart. The rhythm is soothing, like a lullaby woven from iron and ice. You slip outside again, breath crystallizing, boots crunching on the frozen path. The night slams into you like a fist, stealing the brief comfort of the hearth. Stars scatter overhead, in a sky so clear, you almost feel the weight of them. It's beautiful, in a harsh, punishing way. This night full of brittle brilliance and merciless silence. Your cloak clings to you, stiff with frost where your breath has dampened it. Every step is a negotiation. The ground is slick, and one careless fall could break an ankle. A death sentence if no one comes for you. Out here, even a twisted foot might end a life. There are no ambulances, no heating pads, no kindly rescue squads. Only you, the ice, and your luck. And you get the sense the Vikings didn't trust luck much. They trusted preparation. Or they died. The wind shifts, cutting into your face with a knife-sharp chill, and you think of those in smaller huts or half-collapsed shelters, praying their thatch holds through the night. Vikings might have feared giants and trolls, but they feared this more, the silent, patient assassin that was winter. No monster from the sagas could compete with that. You turn back toward the faint glow of the hall, the only sign of human warmth in a world that seems determined to stamp out life. As you walk, the crunch of your boots sounds absurdly loud, echoing off the ice-slick walls of a storage shed. It reminds you that in winter, you're never fully safe. Even inside the walls, death can sneak in through a loose door, or a missing plank, or a guttering flame. They knew that here, they feared it, they respected it, and somehow they survived it, year after year. You ease back into the hall, where the light of the fire feels almost too bright after the winter dark. The crackle of flames echoes through the smoky space, a kind of fragile defiance against the long night outside. You settle near the wall, taking in the carved beams above your head, each etched with twisting knotwork that seems to squirm in the shifting shadows. These carvings are more than decoration. They are prayers in wood, charms to hold back whatever waits beyond the threshold. Historians still argue whether those symbols were truly meant to protect or just to distract restless minds from the despair of unending cold. The storyteller's voice rolls through the hall, weaving a saga of heroes who once strode through these very lands, claiming victory with sword and shield. But there is a quiet, unspoken truth in every face you see around you. The worst enemy is still the winter itself. You watch the children, their eyes wide and shining, hearing of glory and monsters and treasure, but you suspect even they feel the creeping dread that seeps through the walls when the wind howls. Your breath mingles with the smoke, which clings to your hair and beard, filling your nose with a sharp, tarry bite. The fire burns low, carefully rationed to avoid running through precious wood. Everyone knows you cannot trust the weather to be kind. One late blizzard can drain your stores and leave you starving before spring dares return. It's a game of endurance, and you're never quite sure if you're winning. A woman moves through the hall with a basket of dried fish, sharing out thin portions to the gathered families. You notice how even the smallest child takes the fish with solemn hands, as if holding a sacred relic. Food here is a kind of holy thing in winter. Nothing is wasted, nothing is casual. A quirky bit of Viking practice pops into your mind. They believed leaving even a crumb on the floor could anger the household spirits, who might repay the disrespect by souring the next meal or letting sickness creep in. Superstition? Maybe. But in a world where survival hangs by a thread, who would dare take the risk? Outside, you can hear the wind clawing at the walls again, a sound that makes your shoulders tense and your gut twist. It feels like a beast waiting to break through. The dogs sense it too, you notice. They curl tighter into their corners, whimpering in their sleep. There is a communal hush in the hall as people glance toward the doors, half expecting the latch to rattle under the force of a storm or something worse. A young man stands, reciting a prayer to Thor for protection. His voice is thin but steady, and you see heads nodding along, as if that thin rope of faith might bind them together against the dark. Historians still debate whether these prayers were truly religious or simply a way to keep fear from boiling over. It doesn't matter, you think. In this place, even hope is worth preserving, however you name it. You shift again, trying to keep the circulation moving in your legs, and your foot knocks against a shield propped by the bench. It's old, its wood splintered and iron rim rusting, but no one throws it away, because in Viking logic, even a battered shield might stop death, if only for a moment. You imagine someone gripping it in battle, heart pounding, wondering if that thin plank of oak will be enough to keep them breathing. That same calculation repeats here every winter, except the foe is invisible, silent, and patient. Your eyes wander to a group of elders, faces lined with deep grooves, wrapped in thick cloaks of lamb's wool. They have seen more winters than you could ever dream, yet even they watch the door with wary eyes. These are the people who teach the next generation how to stay alive, when to eat, when to sleep, how to read the shape of clouds, how to measure wind. They carry the knowledge of centuries, knowledge written nowhere except in the patterns of their own calloused hands. It strikes you as incredible that such fragile-seeming humans could hold back a winter capable of freezing rivers solid. You rise and step outside again, pulled by the quiet, strange draw of the endless dark. The stars blaze overhead in their frozen dance, and the land stretches away under a crust of ice so bright it hurts to look at. You pause, drawing in a lungful of air so sharp it feels like glass. The Vikings called this time the Wolf Month, believing that the sun itself had been swallowed by a cosmic beast, leaving them to fight through the belly of night until light could be born again. There's a kind of hard poetry to it. This idea of being devoured, yet refusing to die, maybe that is what defined them, not fearless, but determined. You sense it in every half-rotted fence still standing against the snowdrifts, in every rune carved to beg the gods for just a little more time. It takes a special kind of stubborn to face down months of darkness, knowing there is no cavalry, no modern miracle, no backup plan. As you stand there, your eyes grow used to the gloom, picking out shapes. A row of stored sleds, a pile of hay for the livestock, a single lantern flickering in a window, all tiny flames of defiance against winter's suffocating grip. And you, dear traveler, feel the same pull as those who lived here 1,000 years ago. A need to keep the light alive, to keep your people breathing, to keep your stories told. That is how you survive the Wolf Month. One moment at a time, one breath at a time, refusing to let the dark have the last word. You wander past the longhouse, letting the night air sting your face awake, and move toward the village edge, where the communal storehouses squat under heavy snow. Each plank of these simple buildings is blackened with pitch, made to resist rot and rats and the worst of winter's claws. You run your fingers along the rough wood, imagining all the dried fish, barley, rye, and smoked meat stacked carefully inside. In a bad season, that stockpile was everything, the line between life and a shallow grave. The stores might look humble, but you sense the near religious reverence people feel for them. Every family has a claim, yet there are rules, ancient as the stones underfoot, to decide whose hands get to break those precious seals first. You hear that steady chant of fairness and sharing again, but you know the truth is far more complicated. Vikings believed in strength. If you could not defend your share, you might lose it. Historians still argue whether these storage rules were born of communal bonds or blunt survival of the fittest, wrapped in a polite ritual. You push the door open and peek inside. The air is thick with the tang of smoked fish, an almost sweet rot of overcured meat. Baskets of grain line the walls, each marked with a symbol to show ownership. But you know those markings are no true guarantee. In a harsh winter, a hungry neighbor might steal even from kin. That was the hidden law of Viking life. Food came before friendship, and everyone knew it. A rat scurries across the floor, its shadow a dark dart over the straw. You almost laugh. Even these little beasts share in the feast, unstoppable, clever, thriving where humans struggle. The villagers place traps of carved wood, baited with bacon rind, but nothing fully drives them out. Some superstitions even whispered that the rats were a blessing in disguise, sent by Loki to test human cunning. If you failed to protect your food, you deserved to go hungry. Harsh logic, but that was the Viking way. Stepping back outside, you notice tracks in the snow, pressed deep by a heavy sled. Someone has already taken grain toward their house, risking the anger of others. These are the small rebellions that break communities apart, or sometimes stitch them tighter, depending on who controls the story later. Vikings understood that. They told endless sagas about betrayal and trust, about blood feuds sparked by a stolen loaf of bread. You follow the path of those sled tracks, wondering who had the nerve to raid the stores first. That courage or desperation is what kept these people alive, and sometimes killed them. You remember that earlier the skald told of brothers who murdered each other over a fish barrel, a cautionary tale to remind listeners that winter stripped away every polite illusion. Your boots sink into the snow as you leave the storehouses behind, moving toward the smaller homes on the outskirts of the settlement. These low huts, half dug into the earth, look like burial mounds at night. Inside, families curl together, a human knot of warmth, the smell of unwashed bodies stronger than any hearth smoke. You pause to listen. You can hear soft coughing, the shuffle of someone turning in their sleep, even a faint lullaby hummed to a restless child. It is here, in these poorer homes, that winter hits hardest. No carved roof beams, no big hearth, no carved dragon's head to guard the door. Only rough planks and a prayer. The roof might leak, the peat might mold, and if luck turns sour, disease might slip in before spring ever has a chance. Still, there is a kind of hope in their quiet. These families have lived through winters before, and they will live through this one, if they can. You stand near a shutter, peeking through a gap, watching a mother feed a baby with thin milk. The child's cries are weak, but steady, a sign of fight left in them. Historians still debate whether Viking mothers were as strict as their warrior husbands, but judging by the steely look in this woman's eyes, you suspect they had their own brand of ferocity. There is a power here that has nothing to do with iron swords or sea voyages. It is the raw, stubborn refusal to give up, even when the night seems endless. The wind rattles loose boards of her head, making the walls shiver. You step back, letting the hush of snow swallow your footsteps again. It is easy to think of Vikings only as fearless raiders, eager for battle, But here you see a people whose greatest conquest was simply surviving the season. Those who stayed home, who kept the farms alive, who tended the grain and the goats, they were warriors in their own way. They fought the frost and the famine, guarded a world that would otherwise fall to ruin. That knowledge warms you for a moment, even in this icy dark. You glance back toward the central hall, its faint light the only candle in a deep black sea of winter. It looks fragile, but it holds the whole community together. A place to share what you have, to measure what you have left, to remind each other that spring will come eventually. And you wonder if, even now, you might sit there again, trade stories, sip a thin ale, and feel a little less alone. In a world that so often took and tooks, these small gatherings were the true defense. You step away from the huts, boots crunching softly, letting your breath cloud out ahead of you like a small, warm banner. The night remains cold, implacable, but you sense it cannot win completely, not while these families keep fighting for one another and keep hoping for dawn. You leave behind the hush of sleeping houses and head toward the animal pens, where the livestock huddle in their own uneasy truce with the dark. The sheep shift restlessly, hooves scraping against frozen straw, their breath steaming in the lantern glow. You pause to lean on the rough fence, breathing in the mingled scents of wool, manure, and hay. It is not pleasant, but it is honest, reminding you that these animals mean survival in more ways than one. You watch a pair of boys struggling to haul water from a half-frozen trough, the bucket clanging against the rim. They nearly slip on the packed ice, laughing, cursing under their breath in a language as old as the fjords. Their laughter sounds brave, a rebellion against the winter's endless claim. Historians still argue whether the Vikings saw their animals as property or partners, but there is no question these beasts were vital allies in a place where snow could erase every other certainty. A goat bleats sharply as a gust of wind rattles the boards. You scan the fence lines, looking for breaks, for any weakness. If predators came, wolves, foxes, even desperate men, they would find the livestock first. That was always the risk. A quirky bit of old belief floats up in your mind. Some villagers thought a goat's cry could chase away evil spirits, almost like a living alarm bell. Not a bad deal, you think, if you're willing to trust a goat with your afterlife. A sharp smell cuts through the cold. Blood. You glance around and spot a man butchering a sheep on a wooden table, the red stain vivid in the lantern light. He works quickly, hands steady, knives honed by years of practice. The meat will be shared, cured, or boiled into stews, each scrap precious. Nothing is wasted. You catch his eye, and he nods in that quiet way Vikings nod, a silent agreement that this is simply how it must be. You wonder how many times those hands have butchered an animal, how many winters they have seen come and go. The wind moans through the posts, a sound that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. You look back toward the barn, where the oxen stand half awake, their sides steaming. Even their broad strength can be undone by disease or a bad winter storm. You remember how the skald had told of an entire farm lost when a roof collapsed under too much snow, burying every beast in an icy tomb. It is a grim picture, and you force yourself to step away from the memory, focusing on the animals still alive before you. A dog pads past, eyes bright, tail low, scanning the dark as if it too expects monsters to creep from the pines. You kneel to pat its rough head, grateful for that silent companionship. Dogs were more than pets in these lands. They were watchers, hunters, guardians, sharing in every risk. If a wolf pack came, this dog would die to defend the herd. That loyalty feels almost holy in a world that demanded so much from everyone. You stand and look beyond the fences, where the forest presses close, dark and patient. There are stories of spirits who live there, frost beings who watch from behind every tree, hungry for lost travelers. Maybe those tales were invented to keep children close to home, but standing here, you feel their weight. The night beyond the fire's reach does seem alive, shifting, waiting for you to turn your back. The boys finish their water hauling and vanish into a low shed, their bucket sloshing. You watch the goat nudge its neighbor, a small defiance against the night. That spirit, a refusal to lie down, to give in, is what has carried these people through winters for 1,000 years. You sense it in every living thing here, every huddled beast and stubborn child, refusing to be snuffed out by cold or hunger. As you move back toward the hall, you pass another family tending to a sow and her piglets. The mother strokes the piglets like a grandmother might soothe a child, her breath rising in white clouds. You see the determination in her eyes, that promise that these animals will survive because she says so. There is no mercy in the weather, but humans can be merciful to each other, and that small difference matters. You slip through the gate and pause, glancing up at the night sky again. It feels a little lighter somehow, a few more stars visible, as if even the cosmos is rooting for you to endure. You hear the faint bleat of a lamb calling for its mother, and it sounds almost like a prayer, one that you hope the gods are listening to tonight. Your steps crunch on the hard ground, following the narrow path back to the village center. The sounds of the animals linger in your head, a living chorus against winter's quiet hunger. They are part of the same struggle, woven into human survival so tightly you cannot separate them. And in the end, maybe that is what defines this place. A web of life so interlocked that even the smallest creature has a share in the fight. You step back inside the hall, shrugging off a flurry of snow from your cloak. The fire welcomes you, sparking as if to say, "You made it back." And you settle near the flames again, letting the warmth soak into your bones, ready to listen to another tale, another reason to hope, another excuse to hold the dark at bay. You let the fire chase away the chill for a moment, watching the logs hiss and pop, releasing their sweet pine resin into the air. But curiosity pulls you back out once more, down toward the smithy at the village's edge. The forge stands like a beast at rest, its broad roof cloaked in snow, but you can see a glow from within, the heartbeat of a civilization that cannot survive on storytelling alone. You step through the low doorway, nearly bumping your head, and feel the blast of heat roll over you, thick with the coppery tang of iron and soot. The blacksmith is there, sleeves pushed up, hammer ringing against a half-finished knife. Sparks leap like fireflies, dancing in the shadows as he works. You watch him shift the blade in the coals, then quench it with a harsh hiss, a ritual as old as the village itself. There is something deeply hypnotic in this rhythm, the blow, the sizzle, the glow, repeated until raw iron surrenders its secrets. Historians still argue whether Viking smiths were simply artisans or held something like priestly status, given their control of flame and metal. Either way, everyone in the settlement respects this man, because if winter is a war, then steel is its weapon. You walk closer, catching a glimpse of tools hanging from a rafter, tongs, hammers, a bone-handled punch. The place smells of old ash and scorched horn. You notice a rack of unfinished blades, each tagged with a rune mark to ward off misfortune. One even has a tiny carved fish on its tang, a subtle wink that no raider would dare scoff at fish if it kept his sword true. The blacksmith looks up and nods. You nod back, a silent truce between wanderer and craftsman. You can see how tired he is. The winter spares no one, even the man who shapes iron to keep the settlement alive. A fresh iron pot sits near the hearth, its belly still glowing faintly, destined for some lucky family who might avoid scurvy thanks to a few warm meals. You catch a quirk of Viking logic here. They would trust an iron pot as much as a blade. One saves the belly, the other saves the throat, and both matter equally on a dark night. Another hammer strike rings out, shaking the walls, making the coals flare with momentary brilliance. You wonder what stories this man could tell, if only his hands weren't always full of hot iron. Beyond the forge, you see a stack of wagon parts, wooden spokes, an iron rim, even a single broken axle propped against the wall. It reminds you that Vikings were also farmers and traders, and their carts meant as much as their ships, especially for those who never smelled salt water. The wheel is what carried barley to neighbors, carried ale to a feast, carried a sick child to the healer. You think about that overlooked heroism, the wheels that turned year after year, even for those who never set eyes on the sea. A boy, probably the blacksmith's son, runs past with a basket of old nails to be reheated and straightened. Nothing is wasted. You grin, remembering how the skald once joked that Vikings were so frugal they'd reuse the air if they could catch it in a jar. The forge's orange light glows stronger for a moment as the wind outside rattles the shutters. It feels like the only sun in a dark world, a place where human hands push back against the season's cruelty with fire and muscle. You stand for a while, letting that heat warm the front of you, while the back of you still tingles with cold. A strange balance, just like the Viking way of life. Then you slip out again, blinking away the smoke that clings to your hair, and follow the path back to the center of the village. The blacksmith's rhythm fades behind you, but you carry the memory of it, like a war drum that beats confidence into the heart. The wind has picked up, scouring the ground in thin, needling flurries that sting your cheeks. You duck into a low passage between homes, sheltered for a moment from the worst of it, then emerge near the goat pens once more. From here, you can see the larger storehouse where the village hoards its salt and mead. A couple of older men stand outside, arguing about whether the salt is being stretched too thin. You catch snippets of their fight, something about bribing a god with an extra pinch if it brings good fishing next year. That salt is life, more precious than gold, and its rationing is a grim dance. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some Viking households buried salt under their thresholds, a folk ward against trolls and misfortune, a pinch for your fish, a pinch for your luck. You can practically hear the skald chuckling about the double duty of good seasoning. One of the men notices you listening and stops mid-sentence, giving you a curt nod before trudging inside. That little moment of pride, of not wanting to look weak before an outsider, is as Viking as the sagas themselves. The mead barrels stand stacked along the far wall, their iron hoops crusted with ice. You think about the warmth those barrels will bring, the courage it might give on long winter nights, and the headaches to follow. But who could blame them? A little bravery from a cup can sometimes make all the difference between surviving and surrendering. You turn away, letting the thought settle, and walk back toward the hall. The forge, the wagons, the barrels, the old men. They're all threads of the same tapestry. The sea may be distant, but these people still have storms to weather, and they do it with iron, salt, and a certain pig-headed refusal to give up. Stepping back into the hall once more, you feel a little less worried about the darkness pressing against the walls. These neighbors have prepared for it again and again, and even if the sun seems gone forever, you suspect they will make it through. That is the promise you carry forward, a small ember of faith in an unforgiving world. You let the heavy door close behind you and stand for a moment, blinking as your eyes adjust to the fire's glow. Around you, the hall is humming, with the low conversations of people who have known each other since birth. Every voice familiar, every silence shared. The sense of community is thick here, like wool pulled over cold shoulders. You find a spot on a bench and rest, letting your shoulders drop while the flames trace strange shadows across the roof beams. But You can't stay still for long. Curiosity nags at you, so you get up and follow a group of villagers as they make their way toward the small sacred grove just outside the settlement. Their torches stab the darkness in jerky, hopeful arcs, and you sense a kind of hush around them, a reverence that even winter cannot smother. The air is heavy with pine and half-buried herbs. The Vikings had no separation between daily life and their beliefs. The same hands that fed pigs or mended fishing nets might raise a cup to the gods or cut a branch for a simple offering. Historians still argue whether these sacred groves were truly organized temples or just a gathering of half-wild trees, but either way, their power was undeniable. You reach the clearing where a circle of stones stands like silent judges in the moonlight. A goat skull has been placed on one of them, weathered by countless seasons, a token left for God or spirits you can never quite name. Someone has left a clay bowl of dried herbs nearby, a gift to soothe, to bless, to remember. It feels both humble and cosmic, a gesture of respect in a universe that rarely gives any in return. One woman steps forward, head bowed, and you hear her murmur a wish for safe births come spring. Another man offers a few coins, glittering in the torchlight like tiny suns. He whispers something about protecting the sheep from wolves. It's a quiet sort of magic, woven into every part of their world. A quirky belief surfaces in your mind. Some Vikings even thought a spirit might settle in an axe or a cooking pot, so long as you honored it correctly. The group stands together, breathing out a soft song that seems to rise with the sparks from their torches. You let the melody wrap around you, feeling your heart slow, your worries ease. These are the rituals that kept Viking communities from falling to pieces, a way to bind up their fears so they didn't spill out and drown them. The wind picks up, rattling the branches above you, and a scattering of snow sifts down like flour from the night sky. You watch it settle on the stones, momentarily blurring the sharp outlines, and wonder how many generations have stood here, singing this same song. Maybe the words changed, maybe the gods changed, but the need stayed the same. As you turn to head back toward the village, you catch sight of one of the boys from earlier, the water hauler, now tying a small bundle of herbs to a low branch. You recognize it as mugwort, believed to keep away nightmares. It's comforting to see even the young carrying old knowledge, weaving hope into the fabric of survival. Back through the settlement you go, following the tracks your boots left earlier. The cold bites at your nose, but you barely notice it now. The night feels softer, as if those prayers had pressed some gentleness into the air. At the edge of the longhouse, you see a cluster of women working on mending clothes under the torchlight, nimble fingers patching wool and linen. Their conversation bubbles over, something about a lost sheep, someone's new baby, a bit of gossip about who might be getting married come summer. The warmth of their chatter is a different kind of shield against the dark, every shared laugh a defiance. A scrap of woven cloth falls from one woman's lap, and you pick it up for her. She thanks you with a tired grin, her face flushed from hours by the fire. There's strength in that moment, the simple helping hand, the gratitude, the sense of, we are all in this together. You slip away before she can say more, letting her return to the rhythm of needle and thread. At the far side of the hall, an old man is telling a story to a circle of wide-eyed children, his hands dancing like birds in the firelight. He's spinning a tale of a troll who tried to steal a farmer's cow, only to get tricked into carrying a cartload of manure instead. The kids squeal with laughter, stomping their boots, eyes bright. You chuckle too, remembering that humor has always been a survival tool. After all, if you can laugh at a monster, maybe you can face it. You find a place on a bench, letting the children's shrieks fade to a pleasant background hum. You realize that every voice in this hall, every prayer in the grove, Every patch sewn onto a torn tunic is another stone in the invisible wall that protects these people from losing themselves. The sea may be far away, but storms come to every doorstep, and this is how you weather them, together. The fire sputters and flares again, lighting up the faces around you. You see worry there, sure, but you also see courage, layered like the wool cloaks they wear, one thin sheet at a time until it becomes enough. You pull your cloak tighter, letting the heat work its way into your bones. The night presses closer outside, thick with unknown things, but you know that in this hall, under this roof, no one is truly alone. That knowledge steadies you like a stone in your pocket, a quiet weight of reassurance. You let the fire lull you again, ready for whatever the next turn of the night might bring. The embers sigh and settle, casting a softer glow across the hall. You stand, stretching out your legs, and step back into the night once more. The air bites harder now, sharp as a blade, but you welcome it. A brisk slap that reminds you you're still here, still breathing, still moving. The path down toward the animal pens is quiet. The goats already dreaming of fresh grass they won't see for months yet. Beyond the pens, you notice a cluster of stones stacked like a rough cairn, halfway buried by drifting snow. It marks the edge of an old burial ground, a place the villagers step around out of instinct. The Vikings had an uneasy relationship with their dead, seeing them as both honored ancestors and potential troublemakers, if neglected. Historians still argue whether Viking grave goods were meant to bribe spirits into staying put, or simply honor their deeds. You pick your way closer, studying the faint outlines of grave mounds, almost erased by time. Here lies a warrior, maybe, or a farmer, a person who never saw a ship, but whose bones still carried Viking pride. You sense that their ghosts watch the living with a wary eye, keeping score, measuring whether the old values survive. A shrike calls from a bare branch, its cry slicing through the hush like a broken promise. You feel a shiver crawl down your spine, the hair prickling at the back of your neck. There's something raw here, a reminder that the Vikings believed their world was full of hidden watchers, the dead, the land wights, even the gods themselves, all sharing space whether you liked it or not. Pulling your cloak tighter, you walk on, following a faint trail down to a tiny spring-fed pond. Its water steams faintly where it meets the frigid air, a liquid mirror in the darkness. You see someone there already, a young woman kneeling at the bank, dipping a clay jar to collect water. Her scarf is drawn close around her face, and she startles when she sees you. But then she smiles, and you realize this night is more normal to her than it will ever be to you. She tells you in a hushed voice that the spring is blessed, its waters believed to cure fevers and drive away spirits. A fringe belief surfaces in your memory. Some Viking families claimed these hidden springs sang at night, as if the earth itself needed to speak. You can't hear anything now but the wind, yet you feel that quiet magic anyway. You help her lift the jar once she's done, steadying it as she sets it on a small sled. She thanks you, a simple, honest word, and turns away into the gloom, a reminder that not every Viking story is about war. There's a kindness, a daily generosity, that often gets lost under all the axes and shields. On your way back toward the hall, you spot a group of older boys wrestling near a heap of straw, their boots slipping in the crusty snow. They shout challenges and laugh, no different from modern teenagers trying to burn off too much energy. A grown man scolds them from a doorway, threatening to set them to hauling water if they don't quiet down. You can't help but grin, because that same scene has played out in every village, every century, from Iceland to Indonesia. Stepping around the commotion, you find a quiet place near the village's outer fence, built of rough-hewn logs driven deep into the half-frozen soil. The fence is patched in places with wattle hurdles, reminding you that a Viking settlement was always a compromise between what was available and what was possible. They made do over and over, turning good enough into a kind of art. Through a gap in the fence, you glimpse the dark fields rolling away, dotted with lumps of icy earth. Somewhere out there, foxes hunt and mice huddle, everything surviving in its own rough way. The Vikings respected that, understanding themselves as just another piece of nature's harsh puzzle. You look back at the hall, its orange glow steady against the night, and feel a surge of gratitude. Even a stranger is welcomed by the hearth, fed, warmed, protected from the night's long teeth. That spirit of hospitality, or grid, was woven into their laws and their hearts. If you turned someone away, you invited the gods' disapproval, and in a world this dangerous, you needed all the allies you could get. As you step inside once more, shaking the chill from your cloak, you see the skald is still there, retelling sagas with fresh embellishments for the children dozing against their mother's knees. Tonight's tale is about a boy who stole a giant's goat, only to discover it laid golden eggs. The skald winks as he describes the giant chasing after the thief, stumbling over the silly twists of the boy's plan. It's ridiculous, of course, but that was the point, to keep everyone awake, entertained, and maybe even hopeful. The fire pops again, casting a momentary dazzle over the woven wall hangings, their images of beasts and knots dancing as if they could come alive. You remember how important those images were. Teaching tools, reminders of the gods, signposts for a culture where few people ever held a pen. A boy tugs at your sleeve, asking if you'll help him carry more wood in from the stack outside. You nod and follow him back out, passing under the stars. Your breath steams in the air, mingling with the smell of pine resin. You pause to look up. The night sky seems endless, like an ocean made of cold light. Maybe this was the only sea these Vikings knew, you think. A sea of stars instead of salt, currents of wind instead of waves, steering their lives by the shifting constellations. Their dreams unmoored, but still set on courses they could imagine. In that moment, you sense how those who never saw a ship still carried all the strength of their seafaring cousins, rooted to the land, but bold just the same. You bend to grab a log, shoulders straining, and follow the boy back toward the orange safety of the doorway, grateful for even this tiny, humble task. Because in the end, all these small efforts, hauling wood, drawing water, telling silly stories, build a life every bit as fierce and worthy as any voyage. You step back inside, the heat of the hearth hitting you like a wave, wrapping around your cold-stung cheeks until you almost sigh with relief. The boy drops his logs by the side of the fire and scampers off, leaving you alone to watch the flickering dance of flame. Around you, the air hums with drowsy calm, people shifting on benches, leaning on each other, letting exhaustion loosen their stiff joints. But you still can't quite sleep. You wander past the carved posts that hold up the longhouse, each one etched with patterns of beasts, ships, and curling vines. A kind of living family album. You run your hand along the wood, tracing some dragon-shaped swirl that might have been made by a grandfather you'll never meet. It reminds you that even those who never saw the sea still dreamed of dragons crossing it. A woman hands you a clay cup of something hot and honey-sweet. You take a sip, grateful for the sting of warmth in your throat. She tells you with a sly grin that her grandmother used to pour a splash of beer into the hearth each winter to bribe the land spirits to stay friendly. Historians still argue whether these home offerings were purely superstition or a real structured belief system. But either way, they stuck. And why not? It's a small price to pay for a safe winter. As the night grows deeper, a few elders begin sharing memories. You listen to one old man explain how he's never traveled more than 3 valleys from this hall, but he still considers himself as Viking as any raider. That might surprise you, but the word Viking wasn't only about boarding ships and chasing glory. It was an identity, a worldview, a belonging to a people who could endure and thrive in spite of endless hardships. Outside, the wind rattles the boards and tries to sneak through the seams of the walls. You hear a faint whistle through the chinks, like a child trying to mimic a ship's sail. You smile at the thought, even here, landlocked, the sea keeps a presence, carried in language and dreams. One of the elders begins telling a tale of the sea wolves, distant cousins who traveled to Ireland or Francia to trade or raid. He talks with a sort of faraway pride, as though claiming a slice of their victories for himself, even though he never touched salt water. Maybe that's how humans work. We collect courage from each other, even if we've never faced the same storms. The children, still half awake, press closer around the old man, hanging on every word. You see the firelight catch on their hair, on the tiny bits of bronze sewn into their tunics, glinting like little sunbursts. You remember how some Viking parents sewed good luck charms right into their kids' clothes, thinking that even the smallest stitch might keep harm at bay. Then the conversation drifts to gossip. Who is getting married? Who might leave come spring to try their fortune on a river ship? There's a bit of envy, a bit of hope, a bit of fear. You realize that while the sea might be a mystery for these folk, its pull is still tangled in their dreams. They imagine what lies over the horizon, even if they never set foot on a ship's deck. You stand and wander toward the doorway, taking a breath of that shockingly cold air again. The stars blaze overhead, bright and unblinking. For a second, you almost imagine the constellations shifting, like some ancient sea chart guiding invisible ships across the sky. That quiet fantasy sticks with you as you walk around the side of the longhouse, finding a quiet moment to yourself. There, by the fence, you notice a stone marker, half buried in snow. Its runes are worn to near nothing, but you make out a few words about hope and watchfulness. You kneel, brush the snow aside, and feel a strange kinship with whoever carved it. After all, you're both hoping, both watching, both standing guard in a world that can turn cruel as fast as a changing wind. A breeze rattles past, pulling the smell of wood smoke and warm bread along with it. It's so achingly familiar now that you feel a sharp twist of gratitude. You're alive, you're safe, you're welcome here. Even if the sea is only a rumor beyond the hills, these people carry its spirit, the daring to look past the familiar and dream. You head back inside for one last round of warmth, someone singing softly, a lullaby about a fox in the woods, and a woman hushes her baby against her chest. The baby quiets, eyes closing, soothed by a tune that might be hundreds of years old. You stand quietly, listening, your own breathing slowing down. You can't help but think about how stories, even the simplest lullabies, serve the same purpose as those giant ships you've read about. They carry people over danger, through uncertainty, keeping them afloat. That was Viking bravery too, finding a way to sail safely through fear, even if your voyage never took you past the next valley. So, you ease down to your seat again, letting the heat melt through you, letting your mind float. You think about the goats dreaming, the foxes hunting, the farmers tending their fields, and yes, even the cousins sailing far away. Together, they built a legacy, one of courage, endurance, and a quiet pride that doesn't always need a sail to be strong. Your eyes close for a second, body heavy, lulled by the soft rhythm of a land that has learned to survive. The sea will wait, and so will the night, and so will every story worth telling. The hush around the fire deepens, pulling you gently towards sleep. Your thoughts drift, weaving through images of axes and sails, of goats and bread ovens, of fathers telling their sons that courage comes in many shapes. You feel the night itself settle around your shoulders like a woolen cloak, protective, familiar, and just heavy enough to anchor you in place. The singing has faded to a murmur, replaced by the softer noises of people shifting in their sleep. A log collapses into the embers with a quiet hiss, sending a swirl of sparks up toward the low rafters. You trace them with your eyes, remembering how even the smallest flame was once a symbol of hope to these inland Vikings, a promise that winter could be survived. Outside, the wind prowls the eaves, testing every gap. But the walls hold firm. You picture the men who built them, hands raw from splitting logs, setting them deep into the frozen earth. They had no sails to trim or masts to hoist, but they knew how to battle storms all the same. Their storms came in drifts of snow, in frost-bitten nights, in the grinding ache of hungry months, and they faced them without flinching. You wonder how many of them dreamed of the sea anyway. Did they lie awake, picturing a glittering horizon, imagining sleek longships slicing through blue water? Or did they accept their fate as landlocked folk, content with the creak of cartwheels instead of rigging? Historians still argue whether those far inland Vikings truly longed for the ocean or felt perfectly satisfied plowing furrows instead of tides. You step out once more, needing one last lungful of night air. The village lies quiet, lamplight leaking out from tiny windows, a golden glow that clings to the darkness like a whispered promise. You glance toward the tree line, where the foxes still roam, and wonder how their night will go. In the distance, a wolf howls, a note so mournful it feels older than the world. A dog near the doorway answers with a bark, ears pinned back, hackles raised, ready to defend its home. That too is a Viking spirit. Protect what is yours, whether it's a haul of carved timbers or a crew on a wave-tossed ship. And you realize that land or sea, the same pulse of loyalty thrums through their blood. Turning back inside, you shake the snow from your boots and settle down again near the hearth. Someone left a chunk of bread there, probably for a wandering spirit or just a hungry child. That small generosity, you think, is what has kept these villages alive for centuries. Hospitality was never optional, it was law, and maybe even a kind of religion. You close your eyes and imagine your own place here, the role you might play if you had been born to this world. Would you have been a blacksmith, hammering out rivets for sled runners? A weaver, twisting flax into something warm enough to keep your family from freezing? Or maybe, just maybe, a skald, spinning tales of distant places, stitching together dreams for people who never set eyes on salt water? A smile tugs at the corner of your mouth. The skald's job feels closest, doesn't it? To travel with words instead of boots, carrying the spirit of adventure straight into ears hungering for escape. These people needed that escape, needed to hear about trolls and giants, even needed to hear about raids and drowned heroes. It helped them believe they, too, could face whatever waited beyond the door. The fire dips low, pulsing softly, steady as a heartbeat. You hear someone breathing nearby, a warm, quiet presence in the dark. That's what it was always about for these land-bound Vikings. Sharing burdens, sharing heat, sharing stories, so no one had to be alone. You lean your head back against the timber post and let your eyelids grow heavier. You picture the men and women of this village as a kind of ship crew anyway, working in rough harmony, trusting each other to keep the settlement afloat no matter what storms came crashing down. The wind rattles the shutters again, but you barely notice now. You feel safe, welcomed, accepted, even across centuries. You know that if you'd arrived in their time, they would have found a place for you, handed you a cup of ale, and told you to pull up a bench. Land Vikings or sea Vikings, they were all family in the end. The world softens around you. Your heartbeat slows, sinking with the hush of the longhouse, with the gentle night, with the ancient wisdom of people who stood guard over their own slice of wilderness. You let yourself sink deeper into that calm, breathing out the last of your worries. Because here, there is no rush, no fear, no judgment. Here, your story is safe, guarded by farmers who once called themselves Vikings, by children wrapped in fur, by old gods who may still listen from behind the stars. And if tomorrow brings more wind, more snow, more cold, well, they'll handle it. And so will you. And now, as the night folds you softly into its patient arms, you can let your mind settle. Feel how the stories of these people, farmers, weavers, blacksmiths, storytellers, have wrapped themselves around you, a quiet shield against all the sharp edges of the world. Their courage was a steady courage, not flashy or sung in distant halls, but lived moment to moment, season to season, heartbeat to heartbeat. The walls creak gently, their timbers resting, as if the village itself breathes with you. Beyond those walls, the snow keeps falling, covering footprints and broken branches and all the small scars of the day. That snow will melt someday. Feed the rivers, feed the soil, feed the hopes of people who will live and dream here long after you've drifted off. You are part of that current, even from far away, listening across centuries. That sense of belonging is yours to keep, a gentle gift from those who faced every winter with a brave face and a warm hearth. So, breathe in deeply and let it out slow. Picture the soft gleam of bronze, the quiet hush of wool cloaks drawn tight, the flicker of firelight as it dances over familiar walls. Let that peaceful image stay with you, holding you calm, reminding you there is nothing you must fix tonight, nothing you must prove, no giant to slay. You are enough as you are, resting here. The past watches over you kindly, no harsh judgments, only stories waiting to be retold. Let your eyes close, feel your body soften, and trust that the dawn will come in its own good time. Until then, you are safe, you are warm, you are home.